as a joke,
Yes.
I will ask people to call me Dr. Love because of what I study. And sometimes I'll ask them to call me Dr. Brand Love, just to qualify it a little bit, to be a little bit more specific. Before I was married, yeah, that was part of it. It was just dating was so much more interesting than like normal selling soap, marketing soap. Good God, right? So I was, doing this work on dating, and in order to do that work, I needed to study the psychology of love so I could understand how dating and romance worked.
Mm-hmm. Hello, and welcome to Life, Passion, and Business on YouTube. One of our first videos with a guest on YouTube in the new format of podcasts. So look, this is all about the things that we love. Now, what does that mean? What is it about the things we love? Do we love our phone? Do we love our car? I mean, we're not talking about people here. We are definitely talking about the love of inanimate objects or things that we anthropomorphize. Basically, we give them human qualities and we start loving them because of that. So this came about following a conversation with Dr. Arron Ahuvia. And he approached me through Matchmaker FM and said we could have a great conversation about love. And it is a genuinely fascinating conversation here. So Dr. Ahuvia is the Kazanaki Endowed Professor of Marketing at the University of Michigan, Dearborn, and he's the world-leading expert on brand love. Excuse me, I'm going to have to read some of this because some of this is more complicated than I can actually remember. So this all started with his research. He was researching with a colleague into dating apps because he was in marketing, and they were looking to understand how dating apps worked, but that led them to this realization they need to understand how love works. And that started a 30-year journey exploring love. So there's a book called The Things We Love, which came out a couple of years ago. And yeah, it is an amazing journey. And our conversation is very enlightening in terms of how we explore this subject of love. So his work has not just been recognized in academic circles. I need to read this bit next because it's a little bit. He's recognized in industry. In 2019, he received the Stytech Group Brand Relationship Award for research that has influenced business practice. So clearly, this work that he's been doing has really been integrated into industry. Anyway, the most amazing thing about Arron is that he always wanted to be a philosopher, and you can really hear that. We had this conversation about philosophy, and he said he couldn't find a job in philosophy, so we had to go in marketing instead. And he's got a great sense of humor, so I hope you enjoy this conversation. But anyway, we covered the 5 questions on the podcast, which you can find, and the link to that podcast will be up here somewhere, so you can find that direct link to the audio version of this podcast. But this part 2 is an in-depth conversation around the things we love. Now we cover the ideas behind brand love and about how you form a relationship with something that is inanimate. But we also explore the pitfalls of this process, because as AI becomes more mainstream, we are going to see people falling in love with things that react back to them, that give them the thing they are looking for. And that is a very strange slope to go down, a very strange road. So the world is going to change. We all know that anyway, but this is an interesting conversation that might highlight where we are going. I hope you enjoy the conversation with Dr. Arron Ahuvia.
Well, my day job is, as a professor, a marketing professor, I'm really a consumer psychologist. The type of research I do, given my background in philosophy, my writing has sort of a philosophic edge to it, but it's clearly in the field of psychology. And I do psychological research.
Right.
It fits. Go ahead.
No. I mean, yeah, I guess it is. It is very much psychology driven. If you're looking at the idea of people and how people make decisions, do you think marketing has changed much over the last sort of 50 years or so?
Oh my gosh, yes. It's much more science driven and quantitatively driven. So you see in marketing 2 really big trends. One is on the consumer behavior side, a much richer, more sophisticated understanding of why consumers are interested in what they are, want what they want. It's coming through psychology and other kinds of social sciences. And then you also see a big data side to it. So people taking all of this data that's available, every time you go to the supermarket and you buy something and you give them your phone number or some ID, or you pay for it with a credit card, all of those purchases are getting put into huge databases, and people are using all that information and everything you do on the internet that they're tracking. They put it all together and they use it to understand people's behavior. And so there's a lot of mathematical modeling that goes on with that. And that's very different from marketing 50 years ago, which was very intuitively based and, trying to create a good TV advertisement.
I mean, a lot of the stuff going back in time was done using data gathering, wasn't it? I mean, like the first marketing guy whose name completely escapes me now, and I used to know his name, he used to use coupons and that sort of stuff, and the whole coupon process. And I guess that's the same thing, early data gathering.
There's always been a certain amount of data gathering. And part of this is that very early business operated, well, first in what I call the production orientation, which is the Industrial Revolution, which is just, we're a business. That means we're a factory. A business is a factory, and we're here to make stuff. And then after a certain amount of time, that changed. And it's, well, a business is a factory, but lots of businesses are factories. We want to sell stuff. And the selling was very persuasive. It was like, how do we convince people to buy the stuff we make in our factory? And then you get a change to what's called the marketing orientation, which is, instead of trying to convince the customer to buy the stuff you happen to make in your factory, learn to make what the customer already wants to buy. And that'll make it a lot easier. And so that change happened started around 1950. So it was quite a while ago. But as soon as you say, okay, I'm going to try and make what people want to buy, you immediately find out that it's really pretty complicated to make what they want to buy, because they don't always know exactly what they want to buy, and not everyone wants to buy the same thing.
Well, as Ford says, doesn't it? Well, then Ford said, if I asked my customers what they wanted faster carriages.
That's right. So it's very difficult. And so a lot of what I do, it's now 80 years after that initial insight. A lot of what I teach and research on the marketing side is, how do you learn what it is that people really want when frequently they don't know themselves? You ask them what they want and they're not really sure, and they give you an answer because they're being polite, but the answer isn't always correct. So there's a lot to trying to figure out what it is that is going to meet somebody else's needs. And that whole process is data driven, and it's always involved research. But the amount of data and research is dramatically increased from what it was when that started out.
Well, I mean, I'm an ex-digital marketer. I don't do anything of it anymore. But even 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago now, when I was, I was talking to Google people who are involved, not necessarily working for Google, but certainly involved with it. And they were saying, when you do a Google search, there are 70 million data points being considered at that point, because they are looking at all of your previous history and all of your connected history when you do that search. That's
amazing.
So it's like, whoa, that processing of all that information every time. It's no wonder just doing a Google search actually costs quite a bit of energy and carbon, because of the amount of computer power is involved in it.
Yeah, and those are the two trends. The one is sort of getting deeper into the psychology and psychological understandings, and the other is exactly what you're pointing to, with like all this big data analysis. And how do you do that? You've got all this data on people. It used to be the case that if you taught a market research course, you were usually spending most of the time on data collection, because the big problem was, how do you get the data? Now there's so much data from people's behavior on the internet and from their shopping behavior, that getting data isn't the big problem anymore. It's what do you do with all this data, analyzing it and understanding it all. So the shift has really come down, much more of a shift on data analysis rather than data collection.
So it's like, I mean, you told me in our first conversation, you're talking about yourself, you're Dr. Love. You have this sense that you research love. How do you see that fitting into the marketing conversation?
every marketer wants consumers to love their products. That's every marketer's sort of ideal situation, that customers would love their products. And I certainly want to encourage marketers and businesses to create products that people will love. That's a high ambition. The first thing you need to do if you want people to love your products is you have to make sure it's a very good product. That's like just step one. It's not the end of the matter by any means. It gets very interesting after that. But the very first step is, people are not going to love a mediocre product. That's very clear from the evidence. Even if you're a clever marketer, that's not going to happen. So it encourages people to treat customers well, mostly, and it encourages them to make good products that benefit customers mostly. And so I think it's generally a good thing. But as I've gotten more into it, I've discovered it's very complicated, and it isn't even the best goal for every business. As I've come to discover, there are different strategies. I think about it as, there's different athletes, and some people's bodies are just built to be a marathon runner, and some people to be a sprinter, and some people to be a weightlifter. And one of those activities is better than the others. You have to just find the one that fits with your physique and is going to work for you. Mm-hmm. And similarly, there's different businesses, and because of the situation, the competition, the type of product they offer, in some situations, getting customers to love your products is the ultimate goal and exactly what you should be striving for. And in other situations, that's a ridiculous goal, and you're just going to waste a lot of money and time and energy, and that's not something you should
that's true,
putting a lot of energy into.
No one is going to love an industrial brand, are they? If you're a ball bearing manufacturer, you're not going to get people loving your ball bearings. They may love what they do in terms of they're highly reliable and some of the things, but are they going to love the brand?
Not many people, but I wouldn't want to be. You're right. You're on the right track. Your intuition is absolutely right. A lot of these industrial products are not the kind of things that we're loving.
Industrial grease, but it does a good job of greasing the wheels of something. Right. But
being the academic, I have to say, because it's fascinating to me, that as a business strategy, if I'm making industrial grease, there are certain things that you can learn and that they already know from sort of the brand love literature. But as a rule, you're probably not going to want to focus on brand love. But I wouldn't say that nobody is going to love that, because what I've discovered is that even if you've got a product where you're not going to get enough people to love it, for every product that's out there, there's probably a couple people who love it already. I've interviewed a guy who loved steel, the metal, just like not like some steel sculpture that was in his house. He just like the by the ton, the metal steel. And I was like, all right, it doesn't matter how boring this might seem to some people. Now, he was a metallurgist. He was an engineer and a metallurgist, and he felt that you could do a lot of really innovative things with steel, and that other people didn't appreciate the many good things you could do with steel. They think you have to use aluminum if you want it light. But let me tell you, with this new methodology, you can make steel lighter than aluminum and blah, 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 blah. And his friends would sometimes at work, they'd call him the Man of Steel, taking a little pun with the Superman name, because he was, so into this. So it doesn't really matter what the product is. There's someone out there who loves this thing. But yeah, you're not going to get enough people. If you want to use this as a marketing strategy, you need more than 3 people to love it. And it gets hard with all these products to get a lot of people loving them.
I guess I can see what you mean in terms of on our a grease example. If you've got to strip down this piece of kit to get into the center of it to put grease in it, and this particular brand lasts 3 times longer than another brand, then there's a lot of reason to love that grease, because it saves you a flipping lot of work to put it back in the middle of it.
Right. There's a lot of reason to value that. What you need to get at that's fascinating about the work with brand love, and it's a big insight that most companies and consultants who work in brand love don't really get yet, is that there's a big difference between valuing something and loving something. And loving is a very specific relationship. Your brain is doing something very specific. There's certain hormones that are happening. There's certain regions of the brain that are working. There's certain neurological processes with love that are physical neurological processes. And you generally don't apply those processes to objects or brands. You do sometimes. Those are evolved in terms of human and animal evolution for very particular settings. So you love your offspring. Some animals will love their mate. Humans will love their friends. But there's a very limited set of situations that get you to love something. And to see quickly the difference between loving and valuing, just compare your retirement savings with a child. So assuming that you have some retirement savings, and I hope you do, you probably value it a lot because that's really important to you. But if somebody came and said, hey, I'll trade you your retirement portfolio for a different one that's 20% larger, more valuable, you would, of course, say, yes, of course I'll trade you that. That's great, 20%. But if you are a parent and have a child, and someone says, well, you think your child is beautiful and smart, but I'll trade you your child for a different child that's 20% more beautiful and 20% more smart than your child, you would phone the police. You wouldn't do that at all. So you love your child, you value your retirement funds. And because you love your child, they're not exchangeable in that way. And it's not just like how good they are isn't the only thing that matters to you. So the question is, all right, if that grease really lasted longer, that alone wouldn't be enough to get you to love it. That would get you to value it. But if a better grease came along, you would change in an instant, because you're only seeing it as a means to an end. In the same way, in interpersonal relationships, we say, does this person love the other person, or are they just using them? Right? So if you're just using something as a tool, you don't really love it. You're thinking of it in an objectified way. But what gets fascinating is, okay, well, why would you ever love something? Why wouldn't you always think of an object in an objectified way?
How do like a brand of shoes, how does that get so much love? How does, people are so committed to it that they'll have dozens of versions of the same brand of shoe? What's going on there?
Right. So there's three ways that this can happen. In each of them, because love evolved for our relationships with other people or in other animals, humans aren't the only animal species that has love. In other animals, they also have love, but they love their offspring and their mates, etc. If you're going to love an object, your brain has to treat it as if it was a person. So your brain has to sort of make it an honorary person. We're familiar with the idea of objectifying a person, which means you take a person, you think about them in the way you normally think about objects. So we know that there's a difference between the way you normally think about people and the way you normally think about objects. We know on occasion you can switch up and you can think of a person like you think about an object. Well, in order to love something, you got to do the reverse. Take an object that you normally just think of as an object, but now you have to think about it in the same kind of ways they think about a person. And the two most common reasons for this, if you got a pair of shoes, the two most common reasons, one is that you associate it with another person. So if you come to associate a brand with a human being, this could be like the founder of the company. I talked to some people who are they own Ferraris and they're very huge lovers of the brand Ferrari. And they associate that with the person, Ferrari, who created the brand. There was a guy, there's his last name, Enzo, thank you. Enzo Ferrari. They're very interested in his life story and they connect the brand with him. And as a result, when they think about the brand, they think about how wonderful and practical, but how performance it is.
He obviously is an Italian brand, and he was a difficult character, apparently. I mean, I have had these conversations with other people. And there's a story of someone who won early on in his career, someone he made a car for, and the guy took it out and he crashed it. And he brought the car back to Enzo, and Enzo gave him his money back. And he said, really? I want you to fix the car. He goes, you didn't deserve my car. Come on, off you go. He wouldn't sell the car because the guy crashed the car. He wouldn't sell it back to him.
That's fascinating.
So Enzo had this relationship with his cars themselves.
And that's another, yes, he did. And that gets you to another sort of roundabout point there. But if you're a Ferrari fan and you associate in your mind Ferraris with Enzo Ferrari, then your brain will come to think of the car in some of the same ways it thinks about a person because of that connection. And that allows you to love it. And so that connection, it can be usually in our lives, it's a situation like if somebody gives you a gift, then you think about the gift as in connection with the person who gave it to you.
I got some wonder about it because you obviously see this with children. You know, my son loved his cuddly toys and bits and pieces, and they had characters, they had stories around them, and all the bits and pieces. But at some point, you leave that alone. Now, is it just that we compartmentalized it? We're no longer conscious that we love things like in the same way as we did when we were children?
Well, with children, so I mentioned there's three ways that this happens. Yep. One way is you associate it with another person. The second way is anthropomorphism. So the object itself looks like a person. So stuffed toys, teddy bears, these are all anthropomorphic. Yeah. And that's, you get to the same place, the brain starts treating that object as if it was a person, but the relationship is just with the object, right? If you give me a gift, I have sentimental value that I attach to that gift, but the gift is connecting me to you. You gave it to me, so it's a person thing, person relationship. I'm one person, the gift is the thing, you're the other person, and it links us together in this chain. And that's got another person at the end. Whereas with the teddy bear, it's just like the teddy bear is the other person, right, in their mind. And yes, people do become less imaginative as they get older. The tendency to anthropomorphize objects is correlated with a person's level of imagination. And so as people get older, they tend to do this somewhat less. However, we still do it, and we love anthropomorphic things. Your cell phone talks to you. You talk to Alexa or Siri or whoever it is, and the fact that it sounds like a person and talks like a person leads your brain to categorize it as a person, which leads you to make an emotional connection to it that's much stronger than you would if it was just a sort of an inert device that you weren't giving those human qualities to. And this anthropomorphic objects is already quickly becoming just a huge issue, because we're getting these chatbots where you speak to them and they speak back to you. Now, I'm familiar with this, and you've used these all the time. Anyone who's phoned an airline and gotten that horrific, like, you know, this is the Delta system, and tell me what your problem is, and I'll answer your questions. And I don't know about you, but I end up screaming at my phone half the time, get me a human being. I don't want to talk to you, because
this is the product of our age, my friend. I suspect my son would be quite different, a different response to that.
Well, maybe, but it's not that I have something inherently against talking to a machine. It's that they're so bad. Like, I don't believe they're giving me the correct information because I don't believe they understand what I'm saying, and I just don't trust the information.
Whereas my son does, you know,
right.
he will. I know we are so different with this sort of stuff. I've observed it, and it's like I get frustrated, and he just thinks it's brilliant.
However, yes, but these devices that you talk to, many of us have been playing around with ChatGPT, which came out not too long ago.
About 3 weeks.
We've seen how smart these are getting. These are getting way smarter. And that terrible experience that I have on the phone with the airline is going to go away. And we're going to get much, much better experiences.
I remember a couple of years ago now, and I don't know, I mean, where the Google advisor, they had something, Google it was a Google program, and their advisor booked a hairdressing appointment live in this program. And it was obviously a beta testing thing, but it literally phoned this hairdresser up and booked an appointment. And the other end, the person of the business had no idea they were talking to a machine booking an appointment.
That's amazing.
So it's scary, isn't it?
Yes, but we're gonna have so much more of that. And these devices already, what's amazing is that even when they're bad, there are many people who have fallen in love with these things. So you go on the online and just Google, I've fallen in love with a chatbot, and you will get lots and lots of hits of people online talking about how they've fallen in love with chatbots. And And that's what the chatbots say, stupid inane things, and are lousy. In the future, the chatbots are going to be charming, and they're going to be sensitive to your feelings and
so this
super
is the
supportive.
stuff. This is the scary stuff that Yuval Harari talks about in his book 24 Lessons. 24 Lessons for the 21st century.
Yeah.
And he talks about this idea that we're going to get to the stage where the data collection and the data systems will be so accurate, they will find the perfect job for us. They will find the perfect hobby for us, the perfect partner, the perfect life for us, and they will manage us. And we won't even be aware we're being managed.
Right. That's quite possible. I'm not sure, but that's quite a possible outcome.
And we'll be happy.
Maybe, yeah. Here, though, we're talking about not sort of they're managing our whole life, but just, are people going to really become, because currently there's a fear that people always ask me about, which is, do people love objects, and does that interfere with their relationships with people? And the answer is, occasionally there are people like that. It does happen, but it's very rare. The overwhelming situation, much more often, is that people love objects because the object enhances their relationship with another person. We love the games that we play with other people. We love the television that we watch with other people. We watch the football game on TV with our friends. We love the cell phone that we use to text with other people enormously. The reason, when you find out what things people actually love, over and over again, it turns out to be things that connect them to other people. However, it can happen that there are people who get so caught up in their hobby or whatever it is that it causes them to neglect their social relationships. And that is going to be a much more common occurrence when artificial intelligence-based chatbots get very good. I mean, think about our relationships with our pets. I've got 2 dogs. I love my dogs. The reason that human beings are able to love dogs is that our brain sees them as people. And you know this because you treat your dogs like a person. Like, we all talk to our dogs. Logically, we know they can't understand what we're saying. And some things they'll understand walk, but they're not going to understand like the detailed conversations I have with them. But I have these because my brain thinks it's a person.
Well, there is some new research that would suggest dogs understand a lot more than we think, and there's a couple of dogs which have a vocabulary of over 150 words, and they've got this system where they can actually communicate with their owners. So, what we think is what we're discovering now is very different. It's like quite amazing where this stuff is going.
Oh, well, there's a constant trend where we underestimate the rest of the animal world. That's, animals are, and you never see the opposite. You never see, you always see, we used to think that only humans did X. Now we learn that many animals do X. You never see, we used to think that lots of animals did X. Now we learn only humans did. No, it's always in one direction. The animals, we never learned. We thought this species was very smart, but we learned they're stupid. No, it's always, we thought they were stupid, we've learned they're smart. It's always that one direction.
Yes, and they're more sentient than we realize, and we're still eating them. But yes, okay.
Yes, but nonetheless, even if they have a vocabulary of 100 words or 150 words for some dogs that are carefully trained in some reasons, when I have my 2 dogs and one of them is barking and annoying the other dog, and I say, Noodle, is Dumpling annoying you with her constant barking? I know how that can be. The barking also, annoys me. He's not understanding what I'm saying there. There's no way. But I say it because my brain categorizes my dogs as humans the same way the rest of us. We all do this, right? At a non-conscious level, and we behave in ways that correspond with that non-conscious categorization. Well, imagine, we already love our dogs. What would happen, how much we'd love them if they could understand that and they could speak back, and they would have like very intelligent conversations where they really cared about us. And normally in our human relationships, if I want my wife to listen to my boring stories, that I have to listen to her boring stories. That's just how human relationships work. With the dogs, they don't care. Like, they're all about me.
So you can see a lot, where someone eventually gets to the point where they can interpret the dog's, neural and synaptic conversations, And someone will create a voice situation for it and with an AI, and you can actually have a conversation with your dog. That'll happen.
That could happen. But right now, while the dogs are, I believe, smarter than we think they are, they're not that smart. However, and this is going to sound, I know people are going to like react like, oh, he's crazy. I'm not crazy about this. You're going to have an Android dog. It may look like a dog. It may look like another animal. Who knows? It doesn't really matter that much. It's going to have a computer in there. That computer is going to be wicked smart. And you're going to come home and it's going to react just the same way your dog reacts. It's going to be super excited and super happy to see you, and you're going to be happy to see it. But when you start talking to that thing, it's going to be sympathetic and wise and knowledgeable and insightful. And it's going to listen to you, and it's never going to demand reciprocity. It may tell you things about itself because that makes you feel good, but it'll only tell you the things about itself that make you feel good. It'll never go on telling you things about itself because it wants to feel good, because it doesn't have any feelings. Its whole purpose in the universe is just to make you happy. And that is going to be pleasant, but boy, that's going to be harder for real human beings to compete with. Because I wouldn't want to be in a relationship with someone where like they were that narcissistic. We all have a narcissistic tendencies. We're not all certifiable narcissists, but we all have sort of narcissistic tendencies.
The behavior gets learned in a way, doesn't it? I mean, sort of like, so I'm assuming narcissists aren't born. I'm assuming they get created at some point as they grow up. I don't think they're born, are they?
Out of my depth, I would not be at all surprised if there was a strong genetic component to narcissism.
I guess there probably is. Yes, there probably is. There must be.
But like everything else, it's a combination. I do know that there are, I heard a psychologist give a talk once who was in Hollywood and was a psychologist to the stars, and talked about how incredibly common it was for the movie stars to become narcissistic and to develop a full-fledged narcissistic personality disorder.
When everyone says you're fantastic and wonderful and the life revolves around you, I guess it's quite easy to fall into that trap.
That's right. You get surrounded by sycophants, and you know, a normal person does change and becomes much more narcissistic. Well, that can happen to all of us. We can all be surrounded by a sycophantic androids hanging on our every word.
You can see it, you can see the kind of, you know, the geeky kind of keyboard nerd that spends his life in his bedroom, and you know, you can see him never coming out, because you can see buying an android, and why does there need to be any life outside of this room?
And the analogy that I make with this is junk food, right? Junk food isn't the best food. It's certainly not the best food for you by any means, but it's pretty good tasting, and it's really convenient, and it's fairly inexpensive. So it's easy. And we human beings routinely take easy over good all the time. So it might be the case that a real relationship with a human being is in the long term much more richly rewarding.
But there's a messy bit. There's messy bits in it, isn't there? Which
there's messy bits, and wouldn't a lot of people prefer these sort of junk food relationships with robot toys, right? Where they're not as richly rewarding, they're not as deep, but they're easy and they're convenient and they don't ask a lot out of you. That's a scary thought.
And this can go in, you know, I mean, this can go all sorts of directions, because I mean, I mean, you're going to get robot sex and all sorts of stuff with this. That ultimately, aren't you? It's going to go the full gambit, of course.
Absolutely, you're going to have all that stuff going on. It's already going on.
Of course, it is. Yes, because I know there are people that do long range sex, but you know, distant sex with using sex toys that they manipulate for each other. So it's like it happens already.
Right, and there already are sex bots that people are manufacturing. And what's funny is one story about a guy who had fallen in love with this sex bot and claimed that he had a real relationship with the sex bot, and that it wasn't just physical. Like he had this real emotional relationship with the sex bot. And he went on to explain in the story about how it's difficult to care for one of these things, because there's upkeep and there's cleaning that you have to do, and you have to give it baths, et cetera, et cetera. And it occurred to me, you know, if you put as much care and respect into a human woman as you do into the sex bot, you wouldn't need the sex bot. you know, if you were willing to, like, if there's a real person that you were willing to give baths to and massage their hair and give them, you know, all the stuff that you do for that damn toy, you know, you'd be fine.
But there's a whole bridge to get over of consent and meeting and all sorts of bits and pieces and all that, isn't there? Really?
Yeah,
that's what happens in that respect. So where does this work take you? It's fascinating stuff, but where does it? I mean, is this stuff you apply into business work or into teaching with other students? Where does it get? How does it get applied?
Oh, it gets applied in a number of different ways. So one is with businesses. I do some consulting. I do a lot of keynote speeches on this stuff because it's pretty damn interesting. And a lot of it gets applied as, first, does it make sense for my brand or my company to try and achieve brand love? Because it's yes in a lot of situations and it's no in a lot of others. And then if it does make sense, how do I go about it? There's a huge amount to that my work has gone into in some depth. How do you actually create brand love for a company or a service or a vacation spot or whatever that might be? So there's that whole side to it. And then there's the public sort of side to it, which is it good for consumers? My data shows that consumers that love things in their life tend to be happier. And that even includes consumers that love brands tend to be happier, which is different from most other kinds of materialism, where people tend to be less happy the more interested in objects and things and money they are. That tends to correlate negatively with happiness. But loving things seems to correlate positively with happiness. So why is that? And is it really good for them? Or is it just that happy people love things, or does loving things make people happy? Which way does the causation run? That's a lot that I'm very interested in pursuing in terms of my research.
And at the end of the day, though, one thing that I struggle with a little bit on this sort of stuff is it's all driving consumerism, which in terms of the society we live in, it's not doing us any good, that
Yes.
Unlimited consumerism. At some point we're going to have to, because we're living in this world as though it's endless, and it isn't. It has a finance, there's a finity to it, if that's a word.
And loving objects can actually be a positive force in that regard. People who love their cars keep their cars longer, repair them more. People who love the things they own don't buy new ones because they love the things they own. There is some tension, and here there's some tension in my own work that I haven't really resolved. Companies want you to love the brand. If you love the brand Apple, you are likely to go out and buy the next new Apple device, and that will contribute to consumerism. But if instead of loving the brand Apple, you just love your actual cell phone, the thing you hold, that object that you hold in your hand, you love that thing, that will make you want to not go out and buy the next new Apple.
Well, that's why you make the battery burn out after a while, so it starts to play up, and you have to go and buy a new one. That's why you update the software so it becomes slower.
Right. And so for the company, from their side of it, it's like, well, how do you transform that love from the object to the brand that gets people to buy stuff? But the other side, from an environmental point of view, you might also be very interested in this, because you might be thinking, how do we get people to love the things they have, right? Love the things you already own.
If you go back 100 years,
if you go back
100 years or more, you know, people got things. They got married and they got their kit for their house, and that's it. That was the only time they ever got their kit for their house. It was like that was how it was done.
Right.
You inherited the furniture from various people, and you treasured this stuff. We've lost that capacity to value those things.
And so one way that a lot of companies can be profitable and be environmentally sound is to help people move towards less but better stuff. So finding things that you're really going to like, being willing to pay more for them, but then keep them. And there's such a high population in the world and so much competition out there that you don't really need your stuff to break and people to buy it again to be a profitable company. You can be a very profitable company if you can make stuff that lasts longer, because there's so many new customers billions and billions and billions of new customers out there. And we look at that, for example, in the United States with automobiles, where American, a number of years ago, quality's gotten a lot better on American cars. But American cars used to break fairly easily and not last that long. Japanese cars entered the market. And you might think, well, the Japanese cars, they wouldn't make money because people would buy those things, they'd last forever. But actually, they made a lot of money because they took share from the American cars for a long time, until the Americans learned to make much more high quality cars and are now doing much better. So you can make a lot of money selling very high quality, long lasting products.
And that's obviously where we need to get to at some point, isn't it, really? Because it's like, I think, because wasn't there originally, there was I remember there was a meeting in the whenever it was, between the light bulb companies to have an agreement on how long a light bulb should last.
I am not familiar with that.
Well, they had this meeting where they all decided that they could make a light bulb last 10, 15 years, but that was not good for sales of light bulbs. So they came up with an agreement to make light bulbs last 2 years maximum.
Yeah, that would be illegal today.
Well, yes, it would.
and I don't really think that happens very much.
No, but it happened at the time. And I think what happened, it stuck for many, many years. And that became the average lifespan of a light bulb. And that's why LED bulbs turned up in the situation. And they broke the rule, because they're 10 to 15 years.
Right. And LED light bulbs are doing very well. I generally believe, just from my experience working with companies in product design areas, that the planned obsolescence means the company intentionally makes a product last shorter period of time than it might. I don't think that happens very often. I think companies generally make the product last as long as it can, but there are cost issues. So there's a lot of times where making the product last longer would cost more, and the consumer just isn't willing to pay that extra cost.
Good example of this. My mother bought a washing machine when I was about 5 or 6. I remember going down the road with her when she bought this thing, and it cost her 350 quid at the time, which she had to buy on hire purchase because they didn't have 350 quid.
Yeah.
It lasted 20 plus years, that washing machine. When I moved into this house, I bought a washing machine, new one. It was 350 quid. And and those two things are 40 years apart.
Yeah.
So, the value, what was that 350 quid worth now? I mean, you must have been a couple of thousand probably in relative terms.
And products as a whole, especially mechanical or electronic products, not only have they become dramatically cheaper, they're much better.
Yeah.
The quality is much higher. The reliability is much higher. The longevity is much higher. And that's happened because there's just too much competition. The company that makes the product and says, I'm going to plan that this product's going to break after 4 years so that someone will buy a new one, they just lose business to the company that doesn't do that. And because there's so many customers and so much competition out there, that it's very hard to have that kind of planned obsolescence. I don't believe that it's very common for companies to intentionally make their product.
I think you're right. I think it's purely down to price point and the quality of the components that go into something. That's what it comes down to in the day.
Yeah.
So look, we need to tie ourselves up. How do we tie this? How do we put a bow around this conversation? Because I think it's kind of free ranging and interesting, and I don't quite know how to tie it up. So what do you think would be a conclusion to this conversation? Where do people take this kind of information, and how do they apply it?
It depends on. Let's talk about two different listeners. One listener is the business, and it's thinking, how do I take this to make money? And here, the question really is, as I said, recognize that there's a fundamentally different strategy between trying to create brand love, which involves emotional connection and attachment to the product, versus trying to just create value or perception that the product is useful in a pragmatic way. And that those are different fundamental strategies in marketing, and you need to pick one as your primary strategy. And then if you're interested, we can talk about how you go about doing it. But it gets more complicated from there, but that's a fundamental choice that you've got to make, and you need to understand that.
Well, some brand love
choice.
comes about, certainly in the business I'm in, and I see a lot of it comes down from personality-based marketing, where the person, where the person is the front and center of the business.
There's a lot of it.
Elon Musk is a good example. He has lovers and haters of the man, but but there are people that are absolutely Elon fans.
Yes. So that's one way, but there's a whole other way. Anytime that people use your brand or product to define their own identity, so it's a publicly used product, that's brand love becomes very applicable in those types of situations. Yeah. So there's a lot of different situations in which it's relevant. So that's one side, is how do you use it as a business? Then the other side is, as a consumer, how do you create a happier, more rewarding life for yourself? And that, I think, comes down to learning to develop relationships and love things that you have, and choose things that you're going to love, and love the things that you already have chosen, as opposed to getting on this perpetual consumption wheel of buying things, finding out they're not what you want, being unhappy with them, throwing them away, buying something else. That's not a good process.
That's when you're looking for happiness outside of yourself, though. That's about trying to fill the void, isn't it, with outside external influences, and that's a conversation that comes up a lot on this podcast.
But you do need to fill the void with things outside of yourself. The things that you should fill it with outside of yourself are other people, and your connections with other people, as well as creative endeavors that you really enjoy and that you get some positive feedback on. So that's how
I think the things you're talking about there take some effort, though, don't they? They're the things that you do something with someone or with something, rather than buying something to just appreciate that I have this thing now and it's and it's giving me love, because it's not.
Right. You tend to get out of things what you put into them.
Absolutely.
And that's a good life takes effort.
So how do people follow you? Do you have you have books that you've written and things that we can let people know about?
Sure. So the book is called The Things We Love: How Our Passions Connect Us and Make Us Who We Are. If you want to find me, a friend of mine once said, it would behoovia to remember Ahuvia.
So apt.
Very apt, right? So if you just, you put in brand love Ahuvia, you'll find me. I've got a website, thethingswelove.com. I've got a blog on Psychology Today. You can connect there if you're interested in talks, keynote addresses. So just go to the things we can remember the phrase, the things we love. That'll get you to me.
Lovely. Well, we'll put all those links on the podcast so people can track you down if they need to. And
fantastic, Paul.
Are they still studying with you? Are you still taking on? Do you have? I mean, obviously you're at university, so people can actually still study with you, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I take on students, and I work with PhD students around the world, actually. So
lovely.
It's yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Arron. It's been a joy to talk to you. It's been very interesting, and we avoided the rabbit holes beautifully, because there were lots of interesting places we could have gone with this conversation.
Very good. Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me. It's been really a pleasure to be here.
It's been great. Thank you. All the best.